joining our weekly conversation regarding digital transformation. This is our live recording of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. It's a podcast that we release every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And you're getting to be part of the live production of that podcast by being here today. So thank you for being here. Our topic today that we're going to cover here in just a moment is what finance departments need to know about digital transformation. So we're going to really hone in on and focus on the finance and accounting department of any organization and some of the considerations they have as it relates to digital transformation and some of the nuances and unique aspects of digital transformation as it relates to finance and accounting groups. I'm going to introduce our guest here in just a moment, but before I do, just a couple of logistical things. First of all, as I mentioned, this is a live discussion that we have each week on different topics related to digital transformation. You can find us live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter every Tuesday at the same time. And then the episode of the podcast that features this interview, along with other content that goes along with it, will be released a week from tomorrow. On Wednesday of every week, those podcasts are released formally, the edited, formal, finalized versions. Second of all, I have some questions that are going to start the conversation here today, but I really will rely on the audience to provide their questions too. I'd love to hear what questions or comments you have as it relates to the topic at hand here today, which again is what finance departments need to know about digital transformation. And you can ask us those questions at any point along the way by just dropping them in the chat of whatever platform you're watching here today. And speaking of the chat, or speaking of the discussion, if you don't mind just dropping in the chat right now what city and country you're joining us from here today. I'd love to hear where everyone is here or where everyone is from. And just understanding where our global audience is joining us from today will be super beneficial and interesting. So just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. I myself am in Denver, Colorado in the USA. And my two guests here, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, are in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we will let them introduce themselves more formally here in just a moment. But topic at hand, what finance departments need to know about digital transformation. And joining me today are Nicole and Shannon from a company called System 1A. Nicole and Shannon, thanks for being here.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for having us on your podcast. We're very excited to be here with you today. My name is Nicole, and I'm from System 1A. I'm the Director of International Sales. My background is actually psychology and psychometry. And I've always just been very interested in understanding why people behave the way they do, and more specifically in financial departments, why leaders often make the decisions they do. So that's sort of how I got into the tech space. And I'm now going to let my colleague Shannon introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about System 1A.
Awesome. Well, great to see you, Eric, and thanks so much for the opportunity. So my name is Shannon. I am an actuary by profession with a background in complex data analytics and product research and development. So at System 1A, I head up our product division. So very exciting work, just get to work with a bunch of very clever, very creative people, building new products and building new partnerships. And yes, it's very exciting to be here. So I guess that's enough about myself. Maybe to just give a little bit of background into System 1A. So System 1A, we've been around for just over 10 years. I guess to just describe System 1A in a single descriptor, you could say we are a management and digital transformation platform for businesses, accounts receivable and accounts payable processes. So what that essentially means in plain English is that we're a platform that helps businesses conduct their collections processes as well as their payment approval and settlement processes more efficiently and more effectively. In terms of how that all works, so the platform connects that or integrates directly with the ERP, so with the business's ERP, and uses the ERP's information essentially as a base, and then extracts that information, converts it into a universal format, such that it's in a format that's easy for all the teams to use, and that's also easy to understand and interpret. That you're kind of left with a platform that all stakeholders involved, whether it's your sales teams, your collections guys, your payments people, They all have access to the information on a centralized platform through centralized dashboarding, with a host of comprehensive tools to make those functions a lot easier. Whether it's in terms of communication, reporting and statistics, automation of certain manual processes. Really what it's all about is essentially zoning in on one specific, or I suppose two specific business operations in very much detail, and really catering to all the specifics of that operation, and all the nuances and differences that might be in that operation. Sometimes where there's maybe gaps traditionally left by traditional ERP systems due to the fact that they're catering to all operations together.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's really kind of segues into the topic we want to cover here today, which is, and you sort of hit on this, Shannon, in your description of what System 1A does. And that is sort of how do we as finance departments, how do we manage an ERP project and or a digital transformation, and how do we leverage ERP technology without relying on it or being dependent on it to be the sole answer to what we need to help us through, our financial needs within an ERP project. So sort of leading into that, my first question related to that is, what are, when we look at ERP systems, what are some of those deficiencies that ERP systems commonly have that creates problems or opportunities, depending on how you look at it, but creates problems or opportunities for a finance and accounting group? What are some of those deficiencies that you commonly see with ERP systems that you're trying to fill with your product?
So it's an interesting question, and I think it is important to say upfront, ERPs are a fantastic tool in the sense that it centralizes all your different business operations under one platform or under one system. Within saying that, and I guess it's in the name itself, it being an enterprise system that is all-encompassing and that touches on all the different business operations, there is often the trade-off between being a system that is something to everybody versus being a platform that's more specialized and caters for the details of that specific operation. And I think you're always going to see that trade-off no matter what type of system you're looking at over there. So some of the limitations, I guess, that we've come across just in terms of our own research, as well as from feedback from our customers that we work with, there would be like limitations in terms of things like information access. So often how ERPs are structured is with licensing restrictions. So people with certain permissions have access to that information, whereas those who don't have to rely on those people. And that can create like sort of bottlenecks over there, I guess inefficiencies as well. But yeah, when it comes to information access, it's not only limited to it in the literal sense. It can even just relate to something as simple as information navigation, finding the document or the piece of information that you need on time. And that just comes down to the fact that those navigation journeys in the ERP, they're designed at an enterprise level, and not taking necessarily into account what would be most intuitive or what would make the most sense for a specific business operation. So there's just like certain nuances there that might not be taken into account. There can also be, just with regards to limitations with access to reporting and statistics. So for each business operation, the ERP will have certain built-in reports. But the thing is, because it's obviously catering to everything at once, it might not necessarily go into the necessary detail or span the comprehensive range of information that you'd ideally wanted to do, which means there can essentially be gaps in certain insights and stuff like that. Now, it's obviously not impossible to create whatever report you would like from the ERP. As we all know, an ERP, it's essentially a database of all your financial information. It just comes down to the fact that often these ERPs can be a bit inflexible to work with unless you've got that very specialized expertise in how that specific system works, which often means that if you want an additional report on that operation, you either have to rely on somebody external, or you kind of just have to go without. Probably also before we, I guess, move on, just one main other area is just in terms of manual processing. So the ERP is very good at dealing with things that are generated inside the ERP. So if you're generating something like an invoice, credit note, etc., obviously that's very automated and works very well. There can be significant manual processing when it comes to processing information that's generated outside the ERP. So that could be documents that you're receiving, let's say, from your suppliers. Often you have to manually enter those type of things in one at a time, looking at a piece of paper. So obviously, it can take a lot of time in that way. Or even when it comes to, document chain linking. So consolidating documents generated inside the ERP with those generated outside, like an invoice that's generated in with a proof of delivery, let's say, that's generated outside. Often there's a lot of manual processes required to do that. So it can take a lot of time and obviously put strain on your team's resources.
Right. So you're saying, it sounds like you're saying that the functionality of ERP systems is focused on enterprise-wide integrated end-to-end processes, which is a strength of ERP technology in general. But when it comes to going deep within the specific needs of a finance or an accounting professional, that's where sometimes you're lacking in terms of the ability to access information or the ability to have an efficient workflow. Is that sort of a summary of what you're saying?
Yes, no, exactly. I think also just with anything, the more deep you go into, I think, any problem, the more problems you see. Right. So if you're looking at it from a global level, it might look like things all operate perfectly, and that's essentially all you would need. But when you start to, I guess, peel the layers deeper into that, obviously other things do arise.
Right. Now, when you are working with CFOs and finance leaders within an organization, or just any executive within an organization, do the finance departments and the leaders within the organizations, do they understand these nuances and deficiencies of ERP systems, or do they typically think that the ERP system is going to solve all of these problems that you just described, Shannon?
Eric, if I can answer that, it's actually a great question. And when I started working at System 1A, I think almost 10 years ago, it was a huge hurdle that we had to overcome. Financial departments are so structured, and you've got your boss at the top, or your leaders, your decision makers at the top, and you've got your managers, and then you've got your employees doing the actual groundwork. And when we started presenting to companies, we thought that our presentation needed to be directly given to your decision makers, to your leaders at the top. And so we would go in and we'd do our whole presentation, and they'd turn around at the end of the presentation and they'd say to us, quite confidently actually, they'd say, ERP already does this. And look at Shannon or whoever I was with, and I was thinking, okay, what version of the ERP are they using? Maybe I haven't seen it or whatever. Anyway, with respect to the decision makers, or to the leaders, they've been sold the ERP with the belief and the trust that this ERP has total capability, that this ERP is all encompassing, that it's able to do absolutely anything. And of course, they've spent a fortune of money, so they need it needs to all be justified. But we were lucky, because what we quickly realized is if we had the employees who are doing the actual work in the presentation with their boss or with their decision maker, the employees would quickly see the value of our system. They quickly understood how it would make processes far more efficient and effective. So what we did, we decided to always, include employees and include sort of all levels of staff in the presentation. And actually, we realized that these teams would get very excited when they could see what System 1A is capable of doing. So I think that the leaders and the decision makers always are aware of these shortcomings, these deficiencies. Sadly, I don't think so.
So they think, these leaders, it sounds like what you're saying, these leaders think that an ERP system will solve the problems potentially. Yes. But then when you show the capabilities of a product like yours with System 1A, it sort of exposes the additional advantages that might be missing from an ERP system. Is that Okay.
Especially like to the people who are doing the work.
Yeah, the frontline people that actually understand the workflows and the inefficiencies and all that stuff. Yeah.
It's quite funny. It actually reminds me like my time when I used to work in insurance as an analyst. Obviously, you're working more with, the in-depth, you're more hands-on with the data, I should say. And there were many times when you would speak, with Exco or management, and they might look back at you and say, "Well, aren't these processes already automated?" It was always my favorite. Like, aren't these processes? Don't we already do that? I think it's like they see that stuff getting done some way or another, but they're not necessarily always aware of what actually happens to get there, and if that was actually the ideal way to go about it for results in the future.
Right. Yeah. Super interesting. Just to turn to our audience real quickly, I wanted to just come back to the question I asked earlier about where everyone is from, and just to give you a sample of where people are joining from. Virginia in the United States, Singapore, Tanzania in East Africa, India, Denver, Colorado, Chicago, Wisconsin in the U.S., Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, Stockholm, Vienna, etc. A lot of people from Johannesburg in South Africa as well, which, by the way, is my favorite country to visit. Is South Africa. Is so pretty there. So a lot of representation from Africa as well. So thank you everyone for joining wherever you're joining from today. Here's a really interesting audience question. I want to shift gears. I know I said I'd get through my questions first, and you guys were prepared with my questions, but it's no fun if I don't throw a curveball early on in the conversation here and throw in a different question. But this is directly related to what Nicole and Shannon, what you were just saying. So I kind of want to come to this question. This is from Kyler on LinkedIn, and she says, if you are a CFO or a financial department head, what are some key questions or considerations you should ask the vendor during the selection process? And maybe, I guess you could answer this however you want, whether it's about ERP systems in general, or whether it's, sort of a best of breed or a bolt-on solution like System 1A. What are some of those things that you could ask to really drill into understanding whether or not your chosen technology or the technology you're considering actually addresses some of these needs that you both have described so far?
Yeah, sure. So, look, I think when it comes to the selection process, you have your CFOs and you have your leadership who will be concerned with certain factors. And, you've got your teams or your workers who would obviously be using that stuff, who would be concerned with something else. I guess when it comes to leadership, you can always ask maybe more high level and general questions, just in terms of things like security, in terms of, just getting some sort of conceptual understanding of how a specific application can help your business processes. And I think you can essentially ask anything. But I think in order to get that level of, confidence that it's not just somebody who's comes across very well and is, presenting their product or their solution very well, I think there is some sort of value in including people who are actually going to be interacting with that technology on a day-to-day basis. Because some of the things that the vendor might speak to, it might not necessarily relate to you as somebody who doesn't necessarily work hands-on with that type of stuff on a day-to-day basis. So it's a mix of both, I would say.
Yeah, sort of gets back to what Nicole was saying about getting those frontline people involved in the evaluation, and they themselves might have some good questions that help uncover the capabilities or the deficiencies in whatever technology they might be considering.
Yes.
Here's an interesting question. I think I've asked you this question before today, as we've gotten to know each other over the last few months, but this is an interesting question that a lot of people might be wondering. This is from Dan on YouTube, but what ERP systems do you use or prefer? Maybe from the context of, what ERP systems do you find that System 1A particularly helps fill some gaps, or are there ERP systems out there that are particularly good at some of these finance and accounting challenges that you've talked about? However you want to answer that is fine with me.
So maybe let's just preface by saying, when it comes to ERP systems and the structures of ERPs, on the front end, we're not front end experts. So in terms of what actually is the user journey when interacting with the ERP, that's not necessarily our expertise. So when it comes to what we do on our side is we interact with the ERP via the back-end data tables. And the thing is, with different ERPs, it might sit in different places, it might get recorded in different positions and stuff like that. So often there's just more of a, solve the code or solve the key in order to ensure that we're extracting and presenting the right information. But yes, I think, we work with a wide range of different ERP systems, many of the main or tier, I think like tier 2 and tier 1 major ERP systems. So I think that does also speak to the fact that there is something that can help someone. And maybe the feature that somebody uses on ERP1 to help with their AR and AP processes might be different from what necessarily is someone's favorite feature on the different ERP system.
Gotcha. Interesting. So you don't have a favorite is what you're saying. You just have different types that you work with.
The ones that are easy to decipher.
Right. Right. Good. So some of these challenges that you've both described so far with, finance and accounting groups and what some of their needs are versus what they actually get from an ERP system, what type of business value or business benefits are at stake? When you look at, I think you've sort of touched on it maybe a little bit, or you've implied what some of the business benefits are so far, but when you really dig down into it, what are where are the biggest areas or biggest sources of business value or untapped business potential that you're looking to fill?
Sure. So I think the big one, or the big obvious one, is just in terms of workflow efficiency. So obviously, you need a efficient workflow in order to get the results that the department ultimately wants, or at least get it in an appropriate amount of time. And what's the interesting thing about a lot of business operations and the processes they follow is that they're quite standard in theory. There's a process you follow with a certain amount of steps, and then you tick something off the list, essentially. Maybe I'm making it sound too simple. But I think what's important to just recognize and appreciate is that a lot of these operations, they shouldn't be as complicated as sometimes they end up being in a lot of businesses. And that's often just due to facts that, we obviously live in the real world and everything, and there can be certain hurdles and complexities or complications that can arise from a person moving from step 1 to, let's say, step 2 of the process, and ultimately causing a lot of delays in backing things up. And that might just be because of how the ERP is structured or how it caters for a certain process. So obviously we can speak best to examples specific to AR and AP, but like a very common example is, you follow the standard accounts receivable process. You get an order for some goods, you invoice them, you send over the goods, and it's 30 days later, let's say, and it's time to be collecting from your customer. And when you phone them, they might say to you something like, well, we actually don't know if those goods were actually delivered to us in the first place. Now, if you had to just consult what's your theoretical textbook answer to that, it's quite easy. You just give them a proof of delivery, and easy does it, the matter's settled. But then it comes back to something like, because the POD is an externally generated document, it's often not linked to the original invoice, which means that to actually find that POD, you've got to do that manually, often like even, searching through a file or cadenza or something like that. And that in itself might not sound so bad, but I guess what's important to appreciate is that that type of process is happening in conjunction with multiple hundreds and thousands of other different transactions going on, each having their own separate query and each requiring some manual intervention. So you kind of essentially want to remove as many bottlenecks and hurdles as you want to make sure things are run smoothly and effectively. And, when I guess it comes to workflows, you're not speaking about workflows for the sake of having good workflows, but it's all like the byproducts that come as a result of that, whether it's productivity, cost savings, fewer strains on cash flow. Even something like customer relationships is something that can be at stake when it comes to workflow processes. Ultimately, when you're dealing with a different business or different company, whether it's your supplier or your customer, they're in the same position as you. They're also busy with all their different workflows. They've also got to be ticking off certain items to do. And ultimately, what you want to do is you want to put them in a position, or put yourself in a position where to deal with your stuff is easy. It's easy to approve your payment. It's easy to invoice you. And it's not something that's going to take up a lot of their time. And therefore, you can essentially get prioritized in that sense. Workflows is definitely a huge one. But just in terms of decision making, that can be a major one as well. So we've already spoken about, difficulties sometimes in terms of access to information, or access to an adequate set of reports on what's going on in the specific business function. So obviously, if you don't have access to necessarily some sort of insight that would have been useful to a decision in the present, that's going to affect you later down the line in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So this kind of goes back to an earlier question too that I had, as far as whether or not finance leaders understand, these areas of business value and opportunity that are apparent. But on the surface, what are some of the common characteristics of organizations that may find that an ERP system isn't going to handle their needs in the finance and accounting realm? So what are those sort of on the surface criteria that you would say, if you meet these criteria, it's highly likely a off-the-shelf ERP system is not going to meet these needs, and you might want to think about other solutions or alternatives to fill those gaps? How would you describe some of those characteristics?
Sure. So I guess in terms of what can stretch an ERP to its limits in that, it can also be largely dependent on the ERP system itself. There's a range of different solutions out there, and I guess each of them differentiate themselves with being good or worse in a certain aspect, or having more or less functionality. It can depend there. I suppose if we're giving a very general answer to the question, it would probably be anything that can introduce some sort of element of complexity to a process. So examples of that could be, high transaction volumes, large customer base, you have a large team, anything I guess that could just introduce some sort of non-uniformity. So you're dealing with multiple different countries with different currencies. You're a large group with different subsidiaries. All those types of things can make consolidation and aggregation of information more complex and difficult. And that's where you might have those struggles. An example, I guess, on if we're going to give examples specific to us, thinking with accounts payable, high transaction volumes there is a big thing that can put strain on the ERP. And that just goes back to what we've said previously, is because you're getting all your documents from your suppliers and from outside the ERP, you've got a team of people who's entering each of those documents, entering each of those transactions manually. So the ERP, might be fine in that sense, but you're putting a lot of strain on your employee resources by letting them just interact with the ERP.
Yeah, and assuming that they're going to get whatever they need from that ERP is probably not a safe assumption from what you're saying so far.
So it just depends, I guess, on the circumstance. Like, it's either just that they can do it, it's just going to take a lot of time, or it can be just difficult to do. So if you're working with multiple subsidiaries, each, all the different information comes in different formats. If you're using different ERPs in that, you're not, I guess everything, any ERP can do anything if you've got low volumes and stuff. But when you're adding that complexity of multiple transactions going on, you've got your different teams, different people are talking to each other. That's when things get a bit unwieldy.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's what I think is a funny comment. You may not think it's funny, but from Kyler on LinkedIn, I think we should make bottle logs over it. So with every mistake comes an opportunity. I actually liked it too. When you said it, I was like, bottle logs, that kind of sounds better than bottleneck. So anyway, that's a little off topic, but funny. Also, I wanted to, another funny comment. I did not recognize William on YouTube joining from Nashville, which he coins the Tanzania of the South U.S. So thanks for being here today, William. So coming back to what you were just what Shannon was just talking about, another follow-up to that would be, why don't everything you're describing sounds simple enough or not simple enough, but sounds fundamental or basic enough. Like every finance and accounting department needs to do a lot of these things you guys have both been describing so far. So why is it that more ERP systems don't just fix that problem or provide that capability? Is it not that simple, or why do you think that is?
Eric, as we know, ERPs are just very, very complex systems, and they're there to gather data and deal with huge, huge amounts of data. And at the end of the day, they're very complicated databases. And actually, as the ERPs progress, what we see is they're simply iterations of the previous versions, not that much change happening. So traditionally, if we look at the model of the ERP company, we see that these ERP companies have this huge army of value-added resellers. And it's their domain to get the ERP system out there. It's their role. And obviously, it's also the way that they earn their income. So not only is it their job to go and implement the ERP, but then it's also their role to be there along the way, should the client have specific needs that need to be catered for customized bespoke reports, And I think that ERP companies actually choose and expect their value-added resellers for this to be their domain, for them to deal with, the things that come along with it, the additions, and it's their way of earning money. I feel like it's almost a little bit political in a sense. And what we've done over the past few years, Eric, is we've partnered with many value-added resellers so that both them and us can benefit from what we have to offer. At the end of the day, I think ethically, we should all be wanting to offer our clients the greatest, the best solutions, giving them the most capabilities. And often by working together, we can really achieve that. So just keeping, that in mind, going back to your question, I don't think that ERPs in the foreseeable future are going to include the same sort of capabilities that software like System 1A has.
Yeah. Especially as more of these big software vendors are kind of still working on that migration to the cloud and sort of rewriting their code to be fully cloud or SaaS solutions. They're still trying to get caught up on just the basic functionality, not to mention some of this more advanced. It's not even advanced functionality that you're describing, but yet so many ERP systems don't do what you're describing there.
I think what's also maybe just important to touch on over here is we obviously speak about a lot of this with respect to AR and AP processes, because that's what our platform specializes in. At the same time, that's a tiny slice of what the ERP actually touches on. So, you've got like a huge development, task laid out before you to maybe add these functionalities or enhancements to each of the different operations that the ERP encompasses.
Right. Now, here's a question to follow up on this whole thread we're talking about here, and you started to answer this, but maybe we'll come back to it a little bit more directly. This is from Dan on YouTube. Dan says, if an ERP is stretched to the limit in terms of functionality, what would you recommend to supplement it? And I think, Nicole, you sort of answered this a little bit a moment ago. Would it be a best of breed solution or maybe a custom development? And maybe I'll add to that too. How could a product like a System 1A, how does it fill these needs, or how does it address some of these needs or challenges that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so I guess just in terms of what you recommend to supplement it and all of that. Look, I guess it would depend in what business areas is your ERP getting stretched in. We're obviously talking here about applications or platforms that are very specialized in a specific area of a business. It's not necessarily going to help you if you're having issues with your stock takes and stuff like that. You obviously, I guess it's kind of obvious. You need to look in the application or solution that's going to help with that. Yeah, I guess, it's a difficult question in terms of that, just because, I guess the right answer for every business might be a little bit different. But I think it is worthwhile to maybe consider something like adding supplementary applications. It might be a little bit less cumbersome than a whole ERP or a whole system overhaul or something like that. But yeah, it's going to depend on the business that I guess you're speaking of. In terms of, I guess, how System 1A or applications like System 1A can help certain limitations that we've discussed and everything. It comes back to, I guess, what we've already said, that the fact that you've got these applications that are specialized with regards to a very specific function, and therefore they're taking into account those areas where potentially the limitations of the ERP can be stretched. So to just give maybe some examples of that, with regards to the AR and EP side of things, and maybe could expand to, I guess, other operations as well. Things like information access. So we've spoken about that like in a literal sense in terms of licensing, whereas you can have something like an add-on application which connects directly to your ERP, even if it's via a read-only connection, but essentially takes that information and populates it on a platform that can be used by everyone as and when they need it. And you don't need to take into account, the difficulty of going through somebody with a license. It also can take into account things like we've spoken about information navigation journeys. So again, making that more intuitive to the specific department that you're dealing with versus, designing that at a global level. So it can make those things much easier and more efficient. We've spoken, I guess, already about like reports and stuff like that, and just having access to a comprehensive set of information. So I think we're quite good there. But also can relate to things like where you have complex situations such as, you're dealing with multiple ERPs at the same time because you've got different subsidiaries. You have a merger, or you're moving from one ERP to another. Because you have an application that's rather one ERP that's taking into account all operations, but instead is specializing in a specific operation across all ERPs, it enables all those different ERPs to essentially talk to one another a lot better with respect to that function. So whether it's if you're trying to consolidate information across your different units, you're in a merger, or you're trying to move from one, I guess you're in some sort of digital transformation stage yourself, those types of things can be a lot simpler just because that application has expertise across the different ERPs, or at least knows what they're all about. There's also so there's also like things for like support, just for like ancillary functions that can help support core ERP functionality. So like for outside communications, a big thing, making sure that that communication takes place in a centralized platform where everything else is taking place versus something that's taking place externally and potentially getting lost or forgotten about.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. Here's a question that I think is a really good one. It's addressed specifically to you, Nicole, but either of you can answer this. But this is from Jeffrey on YouTube. Jeffrey says, do you happen to deal with clients with silos in their organization? And how often do you address the situation in order for your solution to deliver its intended value?
I'm going to let Shannon answer that.
Sorry, let me see the question. Do you happen to deal with clients with silos in their organization? How do you often address the situation in order for your solution to deliver its intended value? Look, yes, I think you can have a situation where there are silos, like sales is very separate to one another, and then you've got collections and all of that. The way, I guess, sometimes you've got the challenge that you've gone through a specific team first when, you're starting that onboarding journey. And, there can be, I guess, that challenge to make sure that the other stakeholders involved in that process are also, speaking with the application or participating in the application and getting value there. It's a combination of two. I suppose the thing is you need to, I guess, communicate that to your clients to get the other stakeholders involved. But there is always, I think, some dependence on that being driven internally. You've got that collaboration between your different departments or stakeholders.
Got it. Yeah. It's very interesting. And it sounds like a lot of the clients you work with are finance organizations that are dealing with silos by definition because they've acquired other companies or they're global multinational organizations. And that by definition creates silos that it sounds like your product and these challenges we've talked about are trying to address along the way. What about, here's a question I think might be on the top of a lot of people's minds, and it might be a trigger for some people listening. So I apologize if I trigger anyone in the audience here today. But let's talk about integration. Is it difficult to integrate multiple systems? Because essentially what you're describing, or what I think you're describing so far, is a situation where you have a core ERP system that's sort of like your single source of truth, but there's workflow limitations, there's transparency and visibility limitations that we've talked about so far. And so now we're talking about potentially adding another system that addresses some of those deficiencies. So is it difficult to do that? And how does the difficulty and cost of integration and having a sort of, I don't want to say it's a total best of breed approach, but it sort of is. What is the cost and value of that versus, the challenges of that? How would you describe the cost benefit of having that sort of best of breed approach where you integrate multiple systems to address these challenges?
Eric, I think there are two questions to that, and I'll begin by answering the first part. I certainly can't speak about other add-ons or other software, but what I can say is the beauty of System 1A is the ease with which it works. That is really the beauty of the system. It's a totally seamless integration, and it's totally non-invasive. And I think one of the greatest factors is that within under an hour, we can have a new client up and running and looking at live data. All being able to access their system immediately, the different levels within the workplace, being able to access the information that will make them more efficient and more effective. So I think the ease of implementation, the user friendliness of our system definitely empowers employees at all levels, and of course managers and decision makers at the end of the day. So that seamless, that totally seamless integration is very important to us. And we've seen how excited our clients become that, they can almost immediately and instantly start using the dashboard and start working with our system.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there is a cost and maybe a risk. There's a cost and a risk associated with adding a system like a System 1A, but the business value typically would exceed that. Is that a fair summary or statement?
Definitely, but I think Shannon, maybe you can add a little bit more about the cost benefit.
Yeah, sure. So, probably in terms of assessing risks of integration and stuff like that, probably one thing you would just want to assess is with the application that you're looking at, what are the controls in place such that your core ERP system won't be corrupted. So that's probably like a main risk, just if we're talking in a general sense, it's probably something you'd want to ask. Given, I guess, System 1A is read-only, nothing gets actually put into the ERP, and in cases where things are put into the ERP by the system, there are certain permissions and approvals that you have to give before you're doing that. We obviously try to limit those risks as much as possible. Look, and I guess in terms of cost-benefit analysis and all of that, I suppose, your role in strategic digital transformation, you're quite aware that any decision or lack of decision you make is going to have costs and risks associated with it, whether it's upfront and it's something that's very obvious, or it's something that's very hidden and down the line. So yes, I suppose there's going to be growing pains when changing up your system or adding different applications. There's going to be costs involved with that, but you're going to have a lot of down the line benefits, or that's ultimately what you're aiming for in terms of efficiency and in terms of cost savings, which is something that I guess on the flip side would be the opportunity cost of not having. If you stay with things under the status quo. But look, it differs, I guess, from different businesses. And I don't think the takeaway from the session should be, go crazy and just add on 10,000 different add-on applications to your ERP. That's obviously not what we'd be recommending, and probably wouldn't be the smartest thing to do. I think, though, just given the fact that we are in a position where, change is happening every day, things are evolving, it's important to enter these conversations with an open mind in how those types of applications can potentially benefit your business, and then take that consideration forward.
Yeah. And if I could add to that too, one thing that we see with a lot of our clients that are going through the purchasing cycle of purchasing technology for their digital transformations, a lot of times they're sold a vision, an unrealistic vision of what an ERP system can do and why you should not want to consider other alternatives not to replace ERP, but to augment ERP. If I'm an ERP vendor or a VAR and I'm not a partner of yours, look, I know you said you partner with some VARs, but if I'm not a partner of yours and I think about your solution as a potential complementary solution to what I'm selling, I might feel threatened by that. And I might say, no, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you don't need a product like System 1A. My product, my ERP product can do everything. And so in that sales aggression, or whatever you want to call it, or that attempt to sell this unrealistic vision of ERP software, I think a lot of times people end up with a blind spot that says, well, I'm a CFO, vendors telling me their ERP system can do everything you've described and we've talked about here so far today. But I think, those of us that have been through it would find and would argue that that's not true, and that you have to be, to use your words, Shannon, you have to have an open mind as to what the options are out there. That might have been your words, Nicole. I can't remember who said it, but I apologize. One of you said it.
What did I say?
So yeah, I think those are really great points. And I think the other thing too that I would add to what you both said, is that best of breed and integration, those aren't bad words, or they shouldn't be bad words like they used to be. I mean, 20 years ago, yeah, best of breed and integration was kind of a pain. And now, it's not easy, but it's a lot easier now than it used to be. So I think, having that open mind and really looking at what is it we really need, where we can get the business value, and knowing that it's probably not going to be one ERP solution and that's it. I mean, rarely do we ever see that with our clients, that one ERP system is going to solve all of their challenges. Usually there needs to be other systems that augment that.
Years ago, Eric, when we started and our first few clients were signing up, and wanted to use our system and everything, we'd always think, wow, they actually have this openness and they have this flexibility and this willingness to change, because it's not always easy to run with change. I think by nature, we're happy to do what we used to and what we believe we bought into. Yeah.
And kind of along those lines too, Nicole, this is off script here, and this isn't an audience question. It's just a random one that I thought of, is along those lines. Do you see differences in different geographies? Because you're responsible for selling your software, not just in South Africa, but across the world. Do you see like different, differences in cultures or expectations and sophistication and maturities, organizations? Does it vary across different regions from what you've seen?
I think there's similarities and differences. I think at the end of the day, obviously it depends on this particular company, and it depends on, at the CFO level, at the decision-making level, how open and how flexible and how, willing to adapt and how resilient a company is. And I do think that there has been sort of a turnaround, that there is people are looking, like you say, best of breed is not seen as the word that it was seen as 20 years ago. So there's definitely a general trend towards, looking at what else there is out there.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's good. I think that's probably a positive thing. If anything, just to keep an open mind and to know that there might be limitations in the solution that you're buying, and just being aware of those. That's huge, just to have that awareness and
The
understanding.
awareness is everything.
Yeah. So along those lines then, speaking of awareness, when finance leaders are evaluating potential technology, whether it's an ERP system or other types of technology, how can finance leaders assess whether or not their current or planned systems adequately address these gaps that we've talked about so far?
And I think, as we just said, awareness is such a huge factor, that emotional intelligence and that awareness. And I think if you can have wonderful communication with your team, if you can consult with your team, if you can consult with your team at all levels and receive feedback, and for there to be this mutual respect and this mutual understanding, then you will be better able to assess, are things being done the way they need to be done. You'll understand the work that's actually been done, at ground level and through all the levels within a company. I think by, as we said, by being inclusive, by being open, by being flexible, just having that awareness, I think decision makers will ultimately be able to make the right decision. And
Yeah.
Shan, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it quite well. Like, I think it's just so important to be including people who are on the ground and creating that culture, that they're able to actually give their view and their opinion versus maybe just automatically siding with what leadership says. So yes, it's a collaborative effort.
Right. Okay. What about one other thing too? This sort of goes back to the integration sort of question here, and actually a couple people have asked this. That's why I want to come back to it and make sure we cover it. But I'll choose Jeremy from YouTube. His sort of rendition of this question is: it appears to be a great tool to automate and free up staff with significant business intelligence. It appears System 1A accesses local data and creates a web-based application. Is my data safe? And I want to hone in on that last part and come back to another question. Someone else asked about cybersecurity, and how do you lock down this information or this data, knowing that now you've got core ERP system, and then you've got a system like System 1A over here accessing the core ERP system. How do you guys address cybersecurity? What are your thoughts on the whole cybersecurity and data accessibility, data protection, data privacy, all that stuff? How do you address that?
Sure. Look, I think whenever you're having these types of conversations, cybersecurity and data safety is going to come up. It's with justification, something that's very topical. So obviously here at System 1A, we do take security and safety very seriously. And we do so by ensuring that we do comply with any protection of regulation acts when it comes to processing different businesses' information. So that would be things like POPIA over here or GDPR overseas, and upholding those standards and regulations as well. And I think just taking steps beyond that, just to ensure that every business's data that we're using from is treated with the integrity that it deserves, and that's anonymized and hashed where needed. So users can be ensured that although they're using a platform that speaks to the ERP, that their data is safe and protected as well.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely top of mind for a lot of people that are going through these transformations, is cybersecurity and is my data safe? And that's another sort of, I don't want to say it's an unfounded fear, but it's another potential risk that people have in their minds that makes them think, well, maybe I don't want to have another third-party system access my ERP system because of cybersecurity issues. And quite frankly, I've heard ERP vendors use that as an excuse of why you should not want to consider a third-party system. So I think that's, just important to kind of understand objectively what that all means. Well, good. So I guess just to maybe summarize everything we've talked about here so far today, are there any sort of closing words of wisdom or closing advice that either or both of you would leave for organizations that are in, trying to figure out how to best address their finance and accounting needs when it comes to their digital transformation? Anything as far as how to get started or other things to consider that we haven't talked about, what would you say to that?
Sure. Nicole, do you want to start or should I start?
You can start.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess just in closing, I think when you are considering your different digital transformation options or your ERP options, I think we've already spoken about the fact that openness, I think, is always key to these understandings, as well as a deep understanding of how a specific operation works. Things can sound very nice in theory, and they can sound very nice when it's being presented to you with conviction and everything. But there is some sort of importance with going into detail in terms of how a specific operation gets done, what are the challenges that your team is facing, and whether there are solutions out there in the market that might be able to address these concerns or challenges.
Shannon, if I can just jump in there, we actually, Eric, we always offer clients a free trial with our system so that they're able to see for themselves, how you're able to use it, the ease of use. Like Shannon says, that you have to have that openness, but it sometimes helps if you're actually experiencing it for yourself.
Right. And Nicole, since you handle global sales, then Nicole, how do people learn more about the product? How do they take advantage of the free trial? How do they get a hold of you guys? What's the best way to take next steps?
Our website, which is www.system1a.com, or our email address. You can email us on info@system1a.com. And of course, on our website, all our information is there. Our contact details are there, and there's always somebody who's able to answer any questions and provide you with more information on the system.
Great. Well, good. Well, I really appreciate that. This is really good stuff, and really appreciate all your insights and guidance and wisdom here. Super interesting. I learned a lot in this conversation, so thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, likewise, and thank you to the audience too for being here as well, and thanks for all the great questions. Again, this conversation is being recorded. Obviously, we're going to polish it up, edit it, add additional content. It'll become part of our final Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that comes out a week from tomorrow on Wednesday. And then again, every Tuesday, same time, same platform that you're watching today, we do the live recordings of Transformation Ground Control, or at least part of the live discussion or the live interview of Transformation Ground Control gets recorded every Tuesday at the same time, same place. So thank you for being part of that. And someone just asked in one of the chats on LinkedIn, could you please share again which company the panelists are from? It's System 1A. And again, the website is System 1A, and it's numeral 1. You don't spell out 1. It's System numeral 1A.com. And you can find more about them there. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Eric. You too. Cheers.
Thank you.